I nerded out once and like made like an Iron Man themed one with like
Really?
Iron Man color. It was like right when Iron Man like 2 came out, I think, and I was
Nerd.
like, yeah. Yes.
Whiplash was just one of those motivational stories for me that I love that movie.
Yeah. Yeah, that was another one that was I took that one to heart. That one I felt just the archetype of the really aggressive coach or teacher.
Yeah.
You know, and you always think that like we're kind of conditioned to think that kind of character is always doing it for the right reasons or to help push you. But at the end, I still don't know if that was the actual goal of his character. I think he was just really a maniacal person.
Well, his head was hard to get into, but it is those people that push you to do amazing things, like whatever their intentions are.
Yeah.
That's one of those movies that kills me if I watch it late at night, because after that, I'm like so jazzed to go do stuff. I'm like, I've got all this motivation. I'm ready to go do stuff. And it's like, but it's nighttime. So I always try to like save those for the morning. But you never know if it's going to be that movie.
It's a good point. And then, but there's something about watching a movie late at night that's more impactful for me.
Oh, yeah.
If I watch a movie really late, especially if it like Hacksaw Ridge last night, I kind of threw it on thinking I was going to fall asleep, you know, and it got halfway through and I was like wide awake. My adrenaline was going. I was having like, I had some terrifying nightmares actually.
I'm sure.
It's the first time I've watched a war movie and I truly felt I put myself in the position of the people, and it was so gory and so real that I felt like that nervous feeling, like what if just feeling like that person running up a trench, and not many movies have been able to do that. Saving Private Ryan definitely did. Band of Brothers did in a different way. It was more like character development. You know, and the camaraderie aspect of it, where they were kind of trying to glorify it. But this was like parts of that, yes, but also really trying to show you how awful it really is.
Even from like the snippets that I saw, I think when they showed a little chunk of the Oscar for the Oscars, it was just nuts. Like it was not like the pretty deaths. It was the way it actually happens. Just, you know, through and through, the not, you know, in an awkward spot, whatever. It was just everything.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
For moments, I kind of thought, I was like, are they over dramatizing some of this stuff? And then I thought about it. No, I would imagine that's probably
a terrible thing that they have to go through.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about this stuff all day.
Yeah.
So I take it you watch a lot of movies. It seems like you keep up with everything that's current for the most part.
I definitely try to. It's a big part of it. And I mean, I've always loved movies ever since I was a little kid. That's why I do what I do. And I don't know, it's a lot of people call it an escape, but for me, it's just that experience of going to the theater and seeing it is huge for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I feel like, unfortunately, now I get less time to catch certain movies in theaters that I intend to, because there's some movies you just have to see in theaters. Yeah. Like, talking about VFX, Gravity was one of my favorite movies in recent memory, and I think it was so impactful and so amazing because I think Kyle and I went and saw that at IMAX, like full IMAX 3D.
That's the way to see it.
Yeah, Dolby Atmos. And I think everybody I've talked to that's seen that movie, I was like, did you see it in theaters? Did you see it in IMAX? And they saw it on, you know, DVD or Blu-ray. And they don't have as strong feelings about it, which, you know, they just look at they're not really caught up in the dire circumstances and like the feeling of like anxiety and stress of being in space. And the scene they put in the trailer where she's just drifting out and keeps going, that's what hooked me, you know, and what kept me in it. And not to mention, it was a beautiful movie.
I mean, it is a totally, totally different experience. Yeah, I loved seeing that one in theaters. But I have to be careful. Sometimes I'm like, I need to see it in theaters, and then I actually don't. I keep putting it off, and then you miss it. I haven't seen Moana yet, and it's killing me.
Moana's a beautiful movie.
I know. All the music's great. Like, I love Lin-Manuel Miranda stuff, and I just somehow not made it.
Yeah.
It's high on my list.
Yeah. Well, you know, like, especially with VFX and animation, and it's a little different. Like, you know, what I've been really excited to talk to you about is the ZBrush world is sort of, ZBrush is kind of using all kinds of things, but you work specifically in visual effects for film, commercial, sort of, you know, a lot of compositing, a lot of dynamics, a lot of, you know, digital characters. And it's so interesting. Like, the VFX world is, like, you know, when they do like breakdowns, like reels, the VFX world gets the best. It's like the best showcase because you always see just the layer transitions, the wipes of like each layer of compositing.
Totally.
And they just dump in that last digital insertion of like all these things are digitally created with, you know, 3D modeling and sculptors and all this stuff, and then combination with rendering. But that's just like thrown in there.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh yeah, it's just done. But it's not. You know, there's so much more that goes into that one particular layer that I'm always fascinated to hear about, you know, how 3D tools like ZBrush and other things like that require artists to make it. You know, so you've been, you work for Zero VFX.
Yep.
Can we call it Zero? Is that fine?
Yeah, we
Zero?
always
Okay.
just say Zero.
Okay, you guys say Zero too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise,
got
it's a
it.
mouthful. We'd never get anything done.
So how long have you been with Zero VFX?
So I've been there about a little over a year. They actually just barely started this location here in Los Angeles. They started out as a Boston house, and they wanted to develop a character team. So, and also just kind of a Los Angeles presence because it's good to have a place that clients can come in and kind of see stuff. And so much of that happens here. So about a year and a half ago, they started out this Los Angeles team to work on Ghostbusters. Actually, was kind of the big one to test it and see if they could build a character department. And so they brought me in and a bunch of other people for that. And we started on Ghostbusters, and it was a tough one, but it had a lot of fun stuff. And it definitely was one where the breakdown is just layers and layers. That one, it took so many iterations to get it just right.
That one had a really unique. I loved visual effects specifically for that movie. I loved the color palette. I thought all the ghosts. I think there was. I don't know. I think it's always a split decision. You always get people that have negative comments and people that have positive. But I thought it was a beautiful movie, and I loved the specter transitions. Everything was really bright, glowing blue, and it kind of. I'm sure if they could have done that with the first Ghostbusters, they would have, you know?
Yeah, and it's always tough when you're working on an IP that like is something that's been done before because you've got that baseline of people that love the original and they've kind of got it the way it is in their head and maybe not the way it actually really was.
Right.
And so you're always you're going into that fight whenever you do a remake like that. But it offers a lot of really, really fun problems to solve, like the proton beams. They were all digital in this one, whereas the original one, it was literally painted, you know, it was hand-painted lines and stuff, and it's just a whole different story now. But
Right. I think as far as reboots go, in recent memory, I really enjoyed that one, actually, because it was a unique take on, like, the usage of visual effects in a way that it really needed to be there to help tell that story. And then not to mention they had unique characters, like pretty much all the SNL characters.
Yeah.
I love Kate McKinnon. So Kate McKinnon being in that, and she's been kind of showing up in more movies, I think Office Christmas Party and a couple others, but she's such a great character actor.
It was a great cast, and I think that they all acting wise did the original one justice.
Yeah, I think so too. You're never going to get a Bill Murray. Yeah. You're never going to replace it. And you know, like people like Kate McKinnon and the combination of all the characters, that all four of those girls are unique in their own right. But
absolutely,
and I think funnier than, you know, like Bill Murray has this weird quirkiness that I don't think anybody is ever going to figure out.
Right,
he's such a unique person, but all those characters are great, and so you guys have a ton of stuff. Can we actually, Kyle? Can you pull up their list of features? So when you came over to Zero, were you working before that, or was that like your first gig?
No. I had been working. I was at another house for a couple of years before that.
Okay, and where was that?
That was at Pixamundo.
Oh yeah, I know. Okay, I have a friend that works there, and he just started there recently, actually.
Oh really? Yeah. They're a really awesome place. I enjoyed my time there as well.
Yeah,
and they're interesting because at Zero we've got the Boston house and the LA house, but Pixamundo has 2 or 3. I feel like 3 in Germany. They've got 2 in Canada now, 1 in like Shanghai. So they had a bunch of different offices.
Yeah.
And so you're really working with like a wide variety of people.
Right. What would you say is? I know there's usually never one definite thing because everybody kind of does a lot of things, especially as 3D artists. But what would you say your primary role is there? What do you do? What do you spend most of your time doing?
So my title, if you were to put it to that, is a look development generalist. So a lot of it is both sculpting and texture painting to really get the look right. But I'll do lots of initial modeling as well as final lighting for stuff as well. So I kind of try to be a jack of all trades when it comes to that.
Yeah. And what are your, I mean, you know, you're here, so you're definitely, at some point, you're a ZBrush guy. How does that kind of work into your pipeline as far as what you do?
I use it all the time. A lot of times in VFX, you get fun, kind of non-traditional uses of it too. Because I don't think of it as a sculpting package. I think it was a tool in my tool belt to hit kind of all the problems that you go through during the day. Like lots of times we'll have photogrammetry stuff that's a crazy amount of polygons to handle, and we'll do lots of cleanup in ZBrush for that because it just handles it well, and you're really able to get much quicker results than any other package when it comes to that.
So you're taking a lot of photogrammetry, a lot of scan data, cleaning it up, and then you also do lighting. You're saying you're doing lighting. So what do you guys use, like V-Ray or?
We jump around. We're mostly a V-Ray house. We do a little bit in Houdini, which is Mantra, which is kind of similar to RenderMan in a lot of ways.
Yeah, Houdini's amazing. Houdini's got
it's a great package. Yeah. I do a lot in Maya, I do a lot in Max, and a lot in Houdini. It's like the main light and render packages. But Houdini is a versatile program.
Yeah, I would imagine you deal a lot with displacement maps then. No.
No, all the time. I mean, we are always keeping it the lowest mesh as we can so that the animator can get their iterations out as quickly as possible. And that's great when you have, you know, your subdiv levels that you can step through. So you can have your anim proxy mesh, then you go up a level, that's your actual render mesh, and then 3 levels up, and that's the displacement you're baking out.
Right.
But yeah, it's super important to have that flexibility.
What's the, like, as far as polygon count, you know, as far as the resolution goes, I mean, I feel even now, I don't think ZBrush is fully being utilized to the highest potential. It's really about technology and processing power being able to catch up with holding those details, especially with animation and all of that. So have you seen an increase as far as, you know, scan data resolution, how many millions of polys you have? Have you been able to, like, at least in your time working in VFX, has it increased or has it kind of been the same?
It tends to hover around the same, at least in my time, because it's funny because games, it's gone up quite a bit, what engines can handle. But visual effects, there's definitely stuff where you'll get through and it's a much higher topo. But just because animators really like a light rig to get stuff moving and to see stuff, it still stays pretty low. And you'll have stuff like proxy rigs that are then that next level up, so that you're working with something a little higher and get better deformations. But I mean, I think a lot of people would be surprised how low we kind of try to keep it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess everybody, I'm sure what you guys did at Pixamundo, maybe you had the different, general workflow. It's similar, but maybe things change. I would imagine, like your workflow at Pixamundo. Do you still kind of use the same tool set, same stuff at Zero, or did you have to transition into that pipeline?
No, it's It was pretty similar. They were a Max house, mostly 3ds Max. With a little bit of Maya, and at Zero were a Maya house. So there's that bit, but to me, all the programs do the same thing, and it's just learning which buttons to kind of press when it comes to that. So there wasn't too much changed workflow wise, but there's a couple programs that when I am interviewing to see if I'm going to go somewhere, I ask about, and if they don't have them, then I just know that I'm not going to be able to make it there, and ZBrush is definitely one of those. Yeah.
As far as ZBrush goes, how did you, what was your first introduction to it? You know, going back a little bit before you got into the professional, world. Where did you grow up, and how did you kind of get introduced? What pushed you to do this? Because I feel like everybody has a unique story.
Definitely. I was super lucky. I've been using ZBrush, I think, for 8, maybe 9 years. So when I used it all through college, but I also had...
Is that ZBrush maybe 3.5 you started off on? 3.5, R1,
it must have been,
R2, R3?
Yeah, it must have been 3.5. I do consider myself one of those people, like the old farts that were the pre-Dynamesh days. You guys don't know how good you have it.
Gosh, yes.
I used to have a
you
topo
really
start.
I teach ZBrush part-time, and my students... it actually has presented a lot of problems with education, because now it's more practical to start with Dynamesh. It's easier to get somebody, because ultimately, especially if you're a ZBrush person or a sculptor or a modeler, it really is, I appreciate what you said about it, their tools, because it's really just a tool for you to be an artist.
Yeah.
So the workflow is just they should be interchangeable, but we grew up in the era where all you had was building a low poly mesh and you had to bring that into ZBrush. That was like where you started, or you use Z-spheres and you'd block something out and then retypo again.
Yep.
But a lot of times, I would have I spent months and months and months getting the perfect male-based mesh down with the proper edge looping and the proper flow. And that's the one I would use for everything. And same for female and everything else. But Dynamesh presents it like, I teach them Dynamesh first, and then I go show them Z-Remesher and Clean Topo, and they're like, why do I have to do this?
Yeah. And even worse now, it's so easy to find a good base mesh to just work off of. And so many people, obviously in like a tutorial or something, will want to start with that to save time, that a lot of people have never actually ever made their own base mesh and like know to get proper looping stuff.
Right. But, I know a guy, I can't say who, but worked in some features, so a couple of movies, and used the same base mesh for like a zombie character, and then used the same one for like a superhero or whatever. It was the same like lean, simple male, and that was the start. And just repurposing the same thing, that's where the creative part comes in. You have to take this and turn it into something else, But so you started in 3.5.
Yeah, so I actually started. I was really lucky. My high school had a program where they had a little bit of 3D stuff going on. And we did, it was kind of just playing around in Maya for half your school day, which was awesome. Doesn't get much better than that.
Yep.
But I was working on a ZLOT like Protoss model that I thought was gonna be really cool. And I just could not get it there in polys. And I think I saw on like Gnomon or something, a tutorial for ZBrush. It was finally like this release of, okay, I can actually get these details that I need, because so much of what I do, and I love textures and I love like the texture artist thing. And so it's very important to me to be able to get that in there and sculpt it more intuitively than just working with maps.
Right.
So I started in high school actually because I needed to get that extra level of detail.
See, that's progressive. I have a similar background where I started in high school as well. And that was very progressive at that time. It was like early 2000s. And I was using ZBrush and Maya, not knowing what I was doing.
Right.
But so your school had was it a part of your art program? Was it credited or was it?
It was credited. It was like a regular high school, and then you would go to like a center for half the day. They'd bust you out there, and they had a cool little program where you just sit and kind of learn CG throughout the day. And it was great because it was a pretty loose framework, so you could kind of go whichever direction you gravitated towards, which in high school is important because you're already so bored out of your mind sometimes that getting something you're excited in, that's one of the best times to learn. And I think it's always good to learn some of that stuff when you're young, or not that you can't start later, but your mind accepts it a little bit better. I totally
agree. I think it's crucial. Like there's a new wave of 3D artists that are sort of in development right now that are getting those tools earlier now.
Yeah.
And like I think we were probably the first generation to get that at an age where it wasn't, it was still new and different, and nobody else knew what it was. Yeah. And I remember, like, one of the guy that was teaching it, I paid him like it was like maybe $1,000 to build a powerful PC that I could have at home.
Yeah.
And I would just spend late nights. So I would never do homework. All I cared about was art.
I know that feeling.
So you're just like, and I'm down there trying to model like a chess piece. And those are back in the day. When I started with Maya, it was like pushing verts to get a face, and then I got ZBrush. I think my first sculpt was Kratos from God of War. And it was a really crappy sculpt, but I was just like, it was like crack. I was blown away because I didn't have to deal with Maya was more challenging in navigation and tools, whereas ZBrush was. Once I figured out how to divide and use that standard brush, that was the only brush I used. And, but then you learn, but you're right to your point about learning at that early age. It's so crucial because not knowing it takes a really long time to get comfortable in any 3D modeling package, right? And the only way to, circumvent that is just give yourself as much time as possible before you're an adult and have to find a job doing it.
Exactly. And then you're still having fun with it at that stage because there's not the pressure of, oh, I've got the client, coming in to see it.
Yeah.
But I honestly think, I'll make a prediction here. I think that like sculpting, and specifically, ZBrush, because it's not really, it's inarguably at the forefront of this medium. I think that it will become like drawing almost, and I wish they would teach it even to younger people in school because, no offense to school, and all that, but I would much rather have learned ZBrush than cursive. Like,
Sure.
let's just take cursive
Absolutely.
out and put ZBrush in, because with like the advent of 3D printers and the way that's going to happen,
Right.
it will become more useful, and it'll be useful to everybody. It'll be, you know, just being able to sketch that thing up, throw it out, and then you're ready. You just throw in your 3D printer and you're done.
Absolutely.
That thing is there. And traditional drawing will always still be very, very important. But when it comes to that aspect of it, I wish that everyone got like a little experience to it, and then those who would fall in love with it and, you know, just run with it.
Right.
Like my brother's, he's studying right now to be an industrial design major. And the first thing I told him, if you want an edge on everyone else in your program, start sketching in ZBrush, because you will be, you know, visualizing it in that 3D in your head. It's almost like learning another language when you learn ZBrush. It changes the way you think about it, and it's just a step up, like,
Right.
because you have all those tools.
Yeah, and the tools, it's such a great point, because the tools are modeled, like centered around the idea of like full creative, intuitive features that are meant to be creative, and not that was the goal. It was just be creative and sculpt and have it be as fluid as it would be in the real world,
Right.
even faster. And it's interesting, your point about sort of classical trained artists, you know, learning how to draw, which is always important, learning perspective, learning anatomy and figure drawing, all that stuff transitions. But, you know, I'm starting to see a whole new wave of new 3D artists that they are kind of skipping that stuff. Like they get it in high school, but if they didn't quite know what they wanted to do, they didn't know how it would apply. But then they end up, it's like we're training all these sculptors and artists that are sort of superseding that classical training. So then a lot of people I see going back and taking anatomy classes afterwards, because they're realizing like, oh, this cool new career that I started does require some actual understanding of like basic perspective and all these kinds of things, you know?
And I mean, some of that stuff, I often think, like if you're going like the écorché route or learning, sometimes sculpting with your hands, learning that anatomy is sometimes easier when you have to do it a little bit more of a painstaking way in reality than if you're just throwing down a couple of Z-spheres or something. So I think it is great whenever you can to go back to some of the classics like that.
Yeah.
And without a doubt, a lot of like these sculptors from hundreds of years ago are just as good as we are. Like if you go and look at some of that stuff,
Right.
It holds up just fine. There's no, we can't say that we're something special.
Oh, it's unreal. I mean, you look at like Rodin, and like even you just go look at the David, like something that we like kill ourselves over trying to get perfect anatomical figure, not like the muscular, like everything's purely defined, but like the natural state, like at rest, like the David, it's kind of turned and it's loose. But think about doing that in ZBrush, and we have a hard time with that. And there's somebody's like chiseled out of marble is just mind blowing.
It kills me. There's nothing to kill your ego like going to look at something like that and realizing maybe I could do that with this amazing tool that I have. But if I had to try and do it that way, would I be like...
There's something, this was on ZBrush Central, this was maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. I can't remember the artist's name. I wish I could. He was a guy, he took basically the simple, the Polycube 3D, and he just divided that thing up. And he took the cube and he carved out, like just carving away, like carved out a character just using the carve, like subtracting, no addition. Man. And it was a real, and I was blown away by that.
That's awesome.
I wanted to do this years ago. We never really talked about doing it, but I wanted to have do like a Halloween challenge where you take up, like we sculpt the 3D pumpkin, you have a base mesh, and all you have is like, we break down the UI, you can only subtract, and you have to carve out.
That would be great.
Yeah, right? Then you force people to just challenge themselves and do the subtractive process and see what you can come up with, because it's a totally different way of thinking. You know?
But I think it's great to do stuff like that where you challenge yourself and you limit yourself, because it is a limitless program essentially. And so sometimes doing exercises where you're like, okay, I'm just going to use this brush for this, or I'm going to only, or as much as I can today, use panel loops or whatever, to try and use those things that maybe you don't use as much is a really good exercise. So that's amazing that he actually did it just subtractive. I would love to try that. I'm gonna go home.
I would say pull it up, but it's probably like 20 pages deep in ZBrush Central. Like over the years, we've been posting more and more, so it would be a rabbit hole to find it. But I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you. But so when you were in high school, did you know that you wanted to work in animation visual effects? Was that kind of the goal once you were introduced to these programs?
I wouldn't say I'm like everyone else was like, I saw Star Wars and this is what I had to do. I definitely loved it, but I've always had a bunch of careers that I thought would be fun. Like I'm a pretty explorative person. Like I love cooking. I'd love to do something travel based. I'd love to do business, but I definitely, as I started to go through and finish up high school and into college, it sunk in, and that was the path I wanted to go in. And I was lucky. I went to Brigham Young University in Utah, and they have a great animation program.
Okay.
That really helped me get my footing.
So that kind of got you through the general training of all sectors. Basically, you learn animation. I'm assuming compositing, lighting, shading, sculpting, modeling. And
they're interesting. They go more towards like a feature animation route, and a couple people end up going through VFX. So I was one of the people that did the VFX route, but they've got a lot of people out at Pixar and Disney and the more.
Did you kind of just like, what was it for you that made you say VFX was the thing that you wanted? Was that just what you more naturally understood and gravitated towards, or?
There's a couple different things. Like I would, at some point later on, I'd still love to work at a feature animation house. But for me, one, I had a really good teacher who had directly come from the VFX field, and he explained a lot of the stuff so that I understood it, and I could tell that I'd really like that. But also, when it comes to VFX, and especially at a smaller house, which is, I generally try to go to places that are not huge, you get to own the work a lot more, because a lot of the times at a bigger place, and especially with animation, like there's just so much that has to be done that a lot of the times for that movie, you work on like a lamppost or shoelaces, or you don't get to do quite as much. And at least starting out. And so I've always thought maybe going the visual effects route to start out and kind of earn my chops was the way to go, and then transition maybe into a feature animation house when you've got kind of a reputation, you can do some of the more bigger assets. Because I've been very lucky at the places I've been, and they're small enough that you actually get to take ownership of a full asset and kind of put that all the way through the pipeline instead of being just limited to one little phase of the process, you know?
Right. That's an interesting point. Kingsley and I were just talking about this last night, actually. We were working late talking about, like goals and expectations that we kind of set for ourselves. I think as artists, we have this like deep chip on our shoulder where we're trying to sort of prove something to ourselves always. And you're always trying to find, you set a goal, and, you set your goal to, working in VFX, and you want to do this thing, but then you start to do it, and then you start to consider quality of life and what do you want out of it.
Yeah.
And, it sounds like a small VFX house is kind of what works for you, because you get to sort of have more ownership,
right?
And you get to choose as an artist, which I feel like is what we all end up wanting.
Yeah.
And all the young kids coming into the industry, it's like they just want, the idea of having your name in the credits. And it's so crazy that VFX and animation people like seek that out, because you watch the credits and it's just like
that one blip on the radar,
and then you're like, there's my name. Yep. It's like, there it is. But then like ultimately I am seeing that everybody gets to that point, and then they realize that it's not quite as fulfilling if you're not in control of it. If you're doing somebody else's work, and ultimately people end up wanting to break away and go to a smaller house or
start your own thing.
Yeah,
I've always tried to kind of follow the fun and keep things interesting for me, because the other problem that you can get is if you're stuck at one place for so long, you stagnate and you stop learning. And every time you go somewhere new or you try something new, you're forcing yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit. And whether it be with like a package, whether it be learning a new tool or whatever, you have to keep from stagnating in this industry, or it becomes boring, and then you're just not having fun, you get jaded. And so, in visual effects, traditionally, you're working sometimes 14-hour days, you're working weekends. You've got to be having fun. You got to at least try to be having fun in order to make this work and have any sort of quality of life.
Right. That's such a good point. It's so important to continue to challenge yourself in a safe way where you're not, because I talk about all the time the whole CG chip on your shoulder, like 16 hours stayed up, I didn't sleep for 3 days, blah blah blah. But at some point you kind of have to have a good balance of getting out of it what you need, but then also refreshing yourself and coming back with a clear state of mind and not getting so wrapped up in like, I'm just going to dig in and, you know, work on this character sculpt for like 3 months.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's a hard thing to do too, because you can kind of get wrapped up in it. But at least from the people I've met, I've kind of noticed a trend. There's a couple ways to get really good. There's one is just putting in those hours and kind of going crazy at it. And you meet those people and like, yeah, you are magnificent. You clearly, this is your life. This is what you do.
Yeah.
But then you get another people that don't put near as much time in it, but they're either traveling a lot. They're making sure that they have a good quality of life and fun and get those kind of life experiences, and they can still compete with those other people half the time.
Right.
And the real marriage is if you can be someone who is that hard a worker and puts their time in, but also still, like you say, gets out there and does stuff and gets away from the box.
Yeah.
And is actually having that quality of life. Those are the best people, because
I totally agree.
and especially I think this can happen in ZBrush all the time, is if you aren't out kind of experiencing life, traveling, seeing stuff, you start not being able to draw on new stuff in your head, and you'll get these repetitions. I see people that get shape repetitions all the time.
Yeah.
And unless you're actually out experiencing stuff, you don't refill your head with new ideas.
Yeah, you have to
and
step away. Sorry.
It's a really easy thing to have happen. That's why I always try to keep like I photograph stuff wherever I'm at, and I kind of try to keep a morgue of stuff that's just pictures everywhere. And these are pictures that only I have and I know that I can draw off of, and it'll be original.
Yeah.
Because you also get sometimes you'll notice, especially in VFX, you'll notice that texture that's on the first page of the Google search, and you'll notice it even in, you know, big movies.
Yeah.
And you'll just see people or even sculpting, okay, they clearly did these 3 bat images that are on the front page of Google, and you start to notice that stuff.
Yeah.
And so developing your own kind of creative style, but also just your own creative references is huge.
That's such a good point. I think that as artists in this digital world, we do have to consider the art, keep the art part in mind, you know, and not get lost in this like idea of perfecting, recreating things that exist.
Yeah.
And just like, I see it all the time. And I've been guilty of it at times too, where I'll try and recreate things and I'm just looking directly at things, but often I end up having the most fun when I let go of it and I turn that part of my brain off and I just create something from scratch, or just doing those little doodles. Yeah. And like you said, getting away and drawing inspiration from other places, you end up feeling better about your stuff too, because the ones that tend to, the sculpts or the projects that take months or years that some people, it's like, you know, I was kind of hating on this idea that like everybody out there on forums and everybody's like, here's my quick sculpt, or here's a quick sculpt and render of this amazing piece of artwork that I did. And I'm like, most likely it was not quick.
We all know that it wasn't.
I don't think we should condone this idea that sure, there are people that are like wicked fast and they just get it and they've learned the tools and they've done the hard work and now they can do it fast.
Yeah. Or
then every once in a while you do get that prodigy, but that's very, very rare.
Yeah.
But the rest of us is like, it's like we're all holding this false idea in our heads that like, I did it really fast. But like, really, did you probably noodled with that thing for a month or two, and then you tweaked it, then you came back to it and you tweaked it and came back to it and tweaked it, and then you finally just said, screw it, I'm going to post it, you know? And it's like, I think holding appreciation and value to the investment that goes into it and really putting the right kind of energy, you know, like it should be true to yourself in telling a story and caring about the background of the character you're working on, for example, I feel like is important. But yeah, it's a weird thing because we're all competing with each other because we're artists, but also we're artists and we do want appreciation, you know, and it's like trying to seek that approval from everybody is kind of the goal, I feel like.
Yeah. I think the timing thing is interesting. Some people will, and it's hard because in visual effects, if you have to take that long, and sometimes if you're a little bit slower, you will get picked less than somebody else because speed is so important, like especially on commercials, like your timelines are just so killer. And so I get the same feeling as you sometimes when I see it, I'm like, oh, that's so beautiful. But even if I was, working on this for a huge feature, I would never have had the time to be able to go through and do that.
Yeah.
So I always try to keep it fresh. I love just 30-minute even if it looks terrible at the end, just
Yeah.
getting ideas out.
Just accept it. Just be like, yeah, you know what? It is what it is, you
Yeah.
know? And you, of course, you need to do those beautiful, ornate pieces every once in a while and like sort of satisfy your own desire to test yourself and do it.
Yeah.
But then it's like, it's so tough because now with the 3D art being used as a way to, it's kind of more widely accepted in pop culture too. It's like celebrities and artists and people are kind of mixing together now and using digital artists, like people that do, you know, Photoshop concept
Yeah.
and ZBrush concept. And you see people's like, I think it was Brian Wynia, one of our ZBrush friends that works at id Software. He posted on Instagram, it was like his, like a werewolf concept. And like Chris Brown posted it on his, like a direct piece, but
Oh,
with like
that's
a
great.
Chris Brown like sweater vest. And it was like, that's Brian Wynia's artwork on Chris, you know, it's like, it's just, it's weird that it's now kind of trickling into society, but though I think the average person doesn't know what goes into that stuff.
Yeah,
you know?
it's always like you go home and tell your family, "Yeah, I worked on this." Like, "Oh, that's so great! You did. You yourself did all of the effects for that whole movie.
grandma
That took
still
you like
thinks
a
I work
month,
at
right?"
Pixar.
Yeah,
My
it's,
grandma's like, there we go. You still at Pixar, right?
so you made
Yeah,
Brave,
Grandma.
right?
Yeah.
It's like no, it took several months and a billion people to do that, but that's always hard to explain.
Yeah. So you kind of, that's kind of your method to staying inspired and keep pushing yourself is having that work-life balance. You travel a lot.
Yep.
You were telling me earlier that you do a lot of scuba.
Yep.
Do you take a lot of photos when you go out, like reference photos and things like that?
I do, because it's a world that, you know, 80% of people don't get as experienced to. So you already know that you're getting, like I was kind of going at
Unique.
before, unique stuff. And yeah, I love shooting underwater. It's a lot more relaxed too.
What do you shoot on? What do you take with you?
So
You said a GoPro, I
I'd
think.
use GoPros all the time, and that's like a kind of something to keep with you. But I recently got the Sony A6000, and they had fairly reasonable underwater bodies. And I just got for my A7R2, which is Sony's much bigger camera that's full frame. They have an underwater body for that I got,
That's awesome.
and it puts out pretty good stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's hard. It's much harder to get like proper like texture reference photos down there because there's so much junk floating in the water. and
Yeah,
stuff.
you probably have to clean up a ton, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I think that's so awesome. I think pulling from, like, obviously the ultimate goal is being able to pull from multiple references and different things that exist in nature. It's kind of like all the great creature, monster, character designers, especially creatures, they look to nature and they try and find ways to fuse, you know, sea creatures that dwell at the bottom that nobody sees and mix those and match those. And that to me is the most fun part. Like sometimes it's like you kind of have to like let those creative juices go, and nature is one of the best ways to go.
Yeah, and just having stuff, it has to be grounded in that. Because I mean, when you look like skeletal structures of not even just mammals, but like almost everything on the planet, you can see where everything, like there's the rib cage just like a human. There's where the arms ground just like a human.
Right.
And it's all based on that kind of stuff. So if you're not grounding your stuff a little bit in that, the believability goes out the door, and it's much harder to get something that
Totally.
people are going to believe on screen.
That's why we always appreciate, like, I mean, some of the best creature designers, like Tara Whitlatch.
Tara Whitlatch.
We all know she's like the mecca, right?
Yes.
You know, she's got such a colorful style, but also just her way of looking at breaking down anatomy and making it functional.
Yeah.
That's kind of, it's weird that at a time, there was a time where we didn't care about functionality and accuracy, but now it's become like sort of like the driving force of everything that we do. Even
Yeah.
like general conversation, like we pick apart movies because it's like, oh, that would never happen.
Right.
But like sometimes having a good mix of those things can be nice, but you know, you kind of have to find a right balance, of course.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, she's great because a lot of us have gotten pretty good at, you know, anatomical based in reality, but she's great because she'll take in like the ecosystem, like how big could this be, because its
Right.
food source would only be this much.
Right.
And that's where you have to get creative and start thinking of like outside the box. How would this thing ever make? And that's why Avatar is so good, is because they had like zoologists on set and like they thought
Well,
about that stuff.
And the fact that, you know, they have great artists. They had, you know, teams like Scott Patton, great sculptor, and Neville Page.
Yeah,
who
Neville's stuff.
Neville kind of transitions from Terrell's style, where he kind of thinks about all those things as well.
Yeah.
And you can see a lot of those design elements sort of happening, especially in Avatar.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a good reference. Like, love it or hate it. Everybody hates the whole Fern Gully reference, but like, I thought that movie blew me away visually. And it was like, I still
blew
am like,
everybody away. If you
Yeah.
went in there after
still
that
holds
and
up now.
didn't, then
it'll hold up forever.
and start liking it because there's going to be like 6 more. Is my understanding.
So crazy. It's taking like 6 years now just to get to 2. And I'm like, and I guess I've seen the rollout. It looks like every other year, once they roll out 2, they're going to be kicking out the next ones. But
I think the next one's supposed to have a lot take place underwater. So I'm really excited to see that world.
they were shooting down in Manhattan Beach, in my neck of the woods, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah, they rented out. Was formerly Marvel. Marvel had a studio down there, and then they plotted out like a whole section of the ocean in Manhattan Beach that they rented out for like 6 months or something like
James
that.
Cameron gets to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I know.
I remember seeing job postings at Weta like 2 years ago for some of starting on the Avatar stuff. So
Were you thinking about jumping on that?
I love to travel. My original plan was to go to New Zealand fairly early because I love the work Weta does, but I've fallen in love with Los Angeles, and so I think it'll be a while before I jump that ship.
That's good. I mean, you've been here now for how long?
4 years.
Okay. Yeah. So, like you said, I'm sure you'll hit a point where you'll want to challenge yourself again. You'll keep pushing. So
Definitely.
do you think too, as far as like thinking about career moves and changing, do you think too much about the future, or do you kind of just try and stick to the present and not put too much pressure on yourself?
I definitely do think about the future. I'm not like a planner. Like I go on vacation, I decide where I'm going, and then I get there and then I do whatever stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people, it's like, boom, day 1 is this, this, and this. I surprisingly do think a lot about the future planning wise, but I'm never married to it. Like I set goals and stuff like that. But again, I kind of say I follow the fun and what's good. And if some aspect of it, like going to New Zealand, didn't end up happening because I liked it here so much. So I definitely plan quite a bit in the future, but I never am tied to it.
You keep an open mind
Yeah.
to and make a decision at what's best and what you enjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think a lot of us, we all kind of struggle with, what our expectations are in life and careers. And, it's like everybody does want that name the credits, but like sometimes maybe that's not it, or maybe it's finding a smaller VFX house where you can sort of do what you do. If you like to travel and you like to get outside, I mean, taking that part out of your life would almost certainly remove a lot of your creative juice, that creative energy.
Definitely.
Like that's something I struggle with all the time, is trying to keep myself motivated and keep doing things that challenge me. And you nailed it. Like if I'm not challenged, it's just that part of me that I've been doing this, applying myself to artwork for so long that if I don't challenge myself, if I don't do something that's kind of scary or, going against the grain of what's kind of safe and comfortable, I tend to just I lose creative energy.
Well, and you'll lose that edge, which, I mean, right now it is such a competitive industry. Like you go on ZBrush Central and you just see this absolutely amazing stuff. You got to stay on your toes with that kind of stuff. So keeping inspired and keeping happy is a really big part of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, I think with the way my career has gone so far, I've been super lucky. I've been super lucky at every stage of it. And I think an important part is, I mean, it's great to plan out, it's great to have goals and stuff, but when that opportunity hits, you have to take it. Like you can't be so married to something. And I think some people will. I had a lot of friends in school that I'm going to work for Animation House B and there is nothing else that will do it. And, sometimes those people don't end up getting a job for several years.
Because they're holding out for that one thing.
But I think you have to follow the opportunities and just have fun and you'll get there. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. In my experience, it seems like the people that are doers that just continue to push and they're trying new things out and keeping an open mind, you stay active and stay busy and make many connections as you possibly can and leave as many doors open, because when that time comes, you do want to transition, you have options, as opposed to, like you said, marrying yourself to this one, like I want to go work at ILM and I won't settle for anything less than ILM.
Right.
That's a lot of pressure, and you got to consider how that affects your life too. It's like, I like artists, we're on this teetering edge where at any point you could lose control and kind of fall off the cliff and have to climb back up, and you don't want to do that to yourself. Well, so as far as we're talking about a lot of your past and a lot of things that inspire you, you do a lot of traveling. As far as your time at Zero, how has that been for you since you've been there for 4 years now? You guys have a ton of awesome features. We were talking about I was going to say Blockbuster. Blockbuster Video.
Yeah, because that still exists, right?
Ghostbusters, Hardcore Henry, I bet that was I would like to hear some stories about Hardcore Henry as far as, do you guys do any digital? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of digital recreation of characters, right?
So I didn't do too much on Hardcore Henry. A lot of that was our Boston office. We did a little bit there, but that movie was crazy.
It's a wild movie. I've only seen clips.
I think I think one of the main shots we worked on in LA was just some guy flying. His car crashed. He flew out the window, ragdolled it into another car or something. But yeah, that was a wild movie.
Yeah. What are the features you've worked on at Zero? The major ones?
At Zero, I started with Ghostbusters, and then we've worked on a bunch of different commercials here and there inside that. But then we've also been doing some of the Netflix originals.
Okay.
So I worked on that True Memoirs movie, and then we just finished on one that's about to come out on Netflix.
They've been getting a lot of, I think, the budget. There's been some great visual effects driven Netflix originals. What was the one that just came out recently? Spectre, or it was
Stranger Things?
Not Stranger Things. It was oh gosh, I can't remember the name of it. It was like military organization fighting like basically ghosts or spirits.
I missed that one.
I don't know. Anyways.
The Black Mirror stuff's been great. Netflix has been knocking it out of the park.
Is dark but awesome.
I know. I love Netflix. My only thing that makes me sad about Netflix is, again, I love the theater experience, which you don't get as much with that. But they've been buying up so much good content lately that I think they're going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, I agree.
But then I also worked on Fences in between that, which was Denzel's latest movie.
Denzel, Viola Davis.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then I think the rest of the cast was actually, because it was originally a Broadway stage play, and then they adapted it to the screen. I think the rest of the people were actually people that were in the play with him. Mm-hmm. But that one was an interesting one because it was set in, I think, I'm going to embarrass myself. I think it was in the 60s. It was set a while back. And so that's one of those ones where you're not making a giant kaiju or Godzilla or something. Right. It's transforming a world into something that it previously was. And so on that one, I ended up, we had a road that used to be back when on this original street that the original story took place on, used to be like Belgian brick paved with the bricks, and then train tracks going down it. And we had to replace that for all these shots. A road which people are walking on, cars are driving on, and taking that world back to the 60s. And ZBrush was great for that one because essentially I had to have a road that went on for like 2 miles, and you'd see sometimes 2 miles of it in a shot. But then also there was one where literally here's the road and they have the camera right here. Oh. And it has to hold up and look original for that entire length.
How much of that was set extension? How much of that was completely composited out of green screen? I haven't seen the breakdowns for that.
We have some on the site you'll have to check out, but it was essentially like 3 blocks of it where the road originally is right now. And then much further back, it was just all trees and stuff when you had to extend it several miles. So it ended up being matte painting, CG building, CG road, CG cars and all that, then practical road, practical cars and all that, and then up towards the forefront. But that one was nuts. It was fun, though, because it was one of those things where in production you get to use some of the tools that you don't always get to use. I think I used array mesh for that.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that.
But it was one of those things where, again, I go to whatever tool is best. And ZBrush was right for that one because a lot of people are like, oh, we can just use, scans or something like that, or because those streets exist everywhere. But I knew from the beginning that it was going to be one where the director's going to be like, that brick is wrong, and I need it moved.
And you need to change it or modify it. Right.
So the whole process, I had the road in ZBrush, and I eventually ended up tiling it up a bunch, and then layering stuff to make it different. But there was a bunch of moments where it's like, nope, let's get those bricks this way. And you can't do that with a scan. You can't do that with anything else.
Nano and array mesh are perfect for that. So did you make I would take like an IMM brush with a bunch of bricks and then maybe just, probably nano mesh, I would imagine you started with, like take a base polyplane, insert nano, or did you use array mesh? Or was it a combination?
I started out with array, and I had, 2 or 3 bricks that I fed into it and, got the pattern because they're staggered, and then went out further down the line and got the whole thing, and they all had to fit around these railroad tracks, which just adds, it's not like a brick wall where you can tile it so easily.
Right.
There
you
are
have
these
to meet
railroad
the edge of the track and then go
and then have it go out at certain parts. But But so getting the base and everything was down with the array mesh. And then everything was moved by hand kind of after that. And then to get like all the grout and rocks and stuff in that, I used some nano mesh tricks to get little rocks in there.
Right.
And it to look right.
That's awesome.
But yeah, it was great. Like I got out a bunch of different matte materials from poly groups and stuff. It ended up working out quite nicely.
That's what do you find? What do you tend to gravitate towards as far as what you prefer to work on? Like because environments, I always find environments very refreshing and challenging and fun to especially set extensions or changing something like that. It is like not to mention the fact that you have to like as far as your process, you're matching to a camera. Like when you get that asset or when you get the project to make that, do you have digital stills that or complete video shots where everything's set to scale? Like how do you match everything up? Well, did you take something that was already pre-scaled in another app and bring it to ZBrush?
So it all depends. That one was interesting because the road as it is right now exists, but obviously the original road is way paved under with all the blocks and stuff. So they had some cool archival footage that was really rough. Nothing you can actually take an image from, but all just kind of visual reference. But then we had guys go out to set and you'll either do LiDAR, which you know what that is?
No.
It's basically sending out a bunch of rays and scans, lasers, and it rebuilds the mesh for you, like a very kind of ugly environment. And then they'll put in a CG camera and they'll track the shot. So then you do have the actual environment to work with.
Right.
This one we actually did photogrammetry. So it's just taking 1 billion photos, pumping it in and rebuilding that. But still, it's very hard when you've got to meet both those edges of the road and have people walking on it to actually get it to sit in there right. It definitely had to conform to the way the surface of the road actually was.
Right. I would imagine you get some sort of like you have the boundary set for the base mesh, like as far as where those edges meet with the tracking of that camera. You have to put that back into place, and everything else in between is what you're working within.
Right.
As far as you can't like change the snake of the road, you have to keep that exactly where it is, right?
Yeah.
So
until the director says so, and then you have to actually do something crazy like that, but that's the hope.
Well, this is what's so crazy about the visual effects world is like I was saying earlier, like there's so many little unconventional or sort of different ways of using, something like ZBrush in those ways. And I'm always so curious to hear like the more interesting, like the different ways of using it outside of just characters and like sculpting on a brick wall or whatever, like texturing something that's already pre-made, something like that. Do you guys have any, like what's the craziest thing you've had to use ZBrush for? That you could.
I mean, we've got some fun stuff. Like I've had lots of the times we'll have to rebuild an environment or even like further stuff out that'll get matte painted on from actual USGS data. And they have some 3D models, but they're not the best. So I've actually had lots of times where they put out depth maps, though, like depth channels, and I'll pull that in. We sat and tried to figure out the best way to do it, and eventually it just became bringing in on a plane to ZBrush, putting it in as a displacement map, and cranking it to whatever height was there, and then you can actually clean it up, as well as have one of the best things that a lot of people who haven't used ZBrush don't realize is when you start with something like that, you have it on sub D1, which is so low, and as you mesh it out to get the details of, in this case, mountains, you have built in a high res mesh, a medium, and a low, so that animators can be animating on low, and you have all that kind of stuff. The other one that was one of the other ones that was interesting was on Fantastic Four at Pixo.
Oh, I didn't see that one. Oh, that's a Pixamundo.
Yeah.
Okay.
That one we had. Do you know what a match move is?
Yep.
So we had, if anyone doesn't know, a match move is when you've got something real, usually a person, but not always, sometimes an object, and you want to do CG enhancement on top of it. So in this case, it was a person, and it was a superhero that needed their suit, modified. And so they match move, they animate the character to, actually match what the person is doing, so that if it's Tony Stark's, chest thing, you can then put that on to the CG character and then put it on top of the live action plate. This one we had a character that had a bunch of stuff on his suit, and the company match moved it, but they match moved it on several different versions of the rig.
Oh.
So we had different topos throughout the whole thing.
Ooh.
And I ended up having to have this. The
You have to,
scene
like-
was the ugliest thing you'd imagine. It was a mix of layers and morph targets, and every single shot where you saw that character, I had to do this ridiculous morph target matching and transferring it because the UVs were different too, and we
Right.
couldn't get the old ones that were on an old rig to the new stuff. So ZBrush was actually the only way that I could transfer that stuff through projecting
Just do project and then rebuild it.
and stuff like that. So it was just this list of every shot that as a sub tool that then had to be morphed back to another one and then projected and stuff. And it was the only way to do it, like
Yeah.
without some heavy scripting. And it was kind of a solution to a show-stopping problem, but it was one of those not
Wow.
fun things to have to
That's
deal with.
crazy. What was the character? Was it like the Thing, I'm
It was,
guessing? or?
no, it was Doctor Doom.
Oh, okay.
On
I guess,
his,
okay, that makes
his,
sense.
his suit, he had a bunch of these like really deep cracks like within the suit that we had on top of the practical suit, we added some CG lighting elements too. And it definitely saved the day on that one.
That's wild. That's crazy. I love the usage of layers, man. The layers are, I mean, it's a production tool. Morph targets, layers, is a lot of that, but there's a lot of interesting ways to use layers. And, you know, I've seen awesome sculpts where people will take like a base human, apply a layer and sculpt like an ape or something, and then sculpt a completely different character. And it's like you get this morphing of different sizes and shapes. And of course, it's a lot of time spent, obviously, in each one. And your project gets pretty heavy, but
one of the best ones of that I ever saw is it was at Pixel as well, and it was for a movie where a guy's arm basically went from a human arm to just this 10-foot long, tendrily monstery thing. And the artist who originally did it, his name was Marcus, started with a regular base mesh, and the whole thing eventually ended up being the same base mesh, just with a bunch of different morph targets and layers saved out. But it was a 3-shot thing, and every single time, you know, a new piece would kind of grow out, and the final mesh was the craziest thing you ever saw because it was still on a human arm topo.
right.
But some of those tricks that you can do, where else do you figure that out? Where else can you do that? You
I don't know. It sucks for me because I'm such a ZBrush guy now. Like it's been less time learning some of the new stuff, so I don't, you know. But we've had those tools for so long.
Yeah.
That's the thing is like it's been so easy to go to those, and like we were talking about earlier, you know, you stick with what you know, and ZBrush has so many amazing little nooks and crannies like that. Like if you know how to work it,
Yep.
you know, it comes in clutch when you need it.
It's one more tool on the belt.
Yeah, it's interesting, like especially working with layers like that. If you have to transform a hand and then add another part, I would imagine those meshes got subdivided crazy.
Oh yeah, the
high.
final was nuts, and it was all done with displacement maps at the end as
Right,
well.
right.
But
Do you guys use vector displacements in your pipeline, or are you guys still
you know, it's
traditional?
We mostly do traditional. It's a layer of complexity that sometimes is too much. But we're excited about, or I'm excited about some of the new stuff I've been seeing when it was Gabberty and Drust. I think it was on the last summit.
Yeah.
They were showing that you guys have figured out vector
brushes?
Vector
Vector
brushes.
alphas?
Yeah, the alphas. And I remember I was sitting there watching at my desk at work, and they were showing it. I don't know if it's a Nomen or where it was. But
Yeah, it was we were at the Nomen hangar it's like we're in the same campus.
well, and they showed him pulling out that, and I just lost it. Like I stood up at my desk. I was like, "That's amazing!"
I love it.
And I was, the crowd was like, "Oh, that's pretty cool." I'm like, "Why aren't you people
The
like
crowd was-
shouting in the streets? This
Yeah.
is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. It's in a alpha that they've made as a vector that you can pull out as a brush. Don't you know what this means?"
I totally
I was
agree.
very upset about the audience response to that. There was not.
We
near
got the
enough.
biggest crowd roar from the Gizmo 3D, the 3D widget.
Yeah.
I mean, which is awesome, and it's been amazing to have. But I agree with you. I mean, we've got a lot of amazing things that we're rolling out within this next version that we are still, you know, in development with and getting close to finishing. But yeah, that's a big one. Trust me, it's amazing.
I can't wait to actually use it for myself. Just seeing the
I'm
demo
sure
was
you'll
great.
find some awesome uses for it, and that'll be one of those tools that you'll add to your tool belt that
Yeah.
will last for a really long time. I mean, it was kind of like what we introduced with Insert Mesh, and Insert Multi-Mesh was along the same vein, but dealing with Dynamesh and resolution, it's a lot more time to process. And
Well, it's on the same topo as opposed to an insert mesh where then you have to dynamesh it in. Like that's built
Exactly.
into the original, which is going to be awesome.
Yep, exactly.
But it's like we were talking about a little bit before the show. It's funny ZBrush is very good about introducing so many new features, and you have to like keep up with all the cool ones. And I sometimes get not afraid, but I'm like, when would I use that? And the new one that I've been playing around with so much is, and I'm going to be bad and say it because it's been out for a long time.
Yeah.
But I was super afraid of ZModeler.
You and so many other people.
Well, and it's because it's doing something that people generally do in those packages. And like, oh, it works fine in there.
Yeah.
So I was so afraid of using it. And then the past couple of months, I finally one day was just like, no, I need to check this out.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I'm so glad to hear it.
I love hard surface stuff in ZBrush. Like most of the stuff I do is organic, but whenever I want to have some fun, I'll do some hard surface. And it's an answer to all those problems. And it's an answer of having to put it to another package, to do a occasional vert welding and stuff like that.
Yep.
It is so fun. And like the creasing stuff, so you can keep your base meshes lower.
Q mesh with poly groups, poly loops, like all these.
The selecting the temporary groups and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, it's great. If you guys are like me and were afraid of ZModeler, go give it a try.
How did you go to, we have like a whole set of like 50 or 60 tutorials on ZModeler, like going through what each button does.
Yeah.
Is that where you started?
I started with that. I watched 2 or 3 of those. I watched some random ones on YouTube.
Once you grab a couple, it makes sense. It's just you need to understand the target, the action, and figure out, because a couple of them are sort of like trademark names, like Q mesh and
right.
But the general poly lube, edge looping, multi, like it's across the board in every application. So you kind of get the basics of it once you start.
You do, and it's so much quicker, and that's what I love about it. It's super, super quick, because you're actually, instead of switching modes or whatever to go from poly to vert or whatever, it's just whatever you're hovering over, and it takes a little bit to get used to, but once you get it, it's so quick.
I think that's like I think what a lot of people, everybody, there's that fear, like we were talking about earlier. It's like you have your tool set and you stick to it because that's what works and you're comfortable with it.
Yep.
But transitioning to something new, I find, even just removing myself from working for Pixelogic as an artist, there's a lot of stuff that I still, I teach character design, Maya and ZBrush pipeline, and there's some stuff I had to go to Maya for that I would, but once we started introducing more hard surface stuff, especially ZModeler, not only has it sped up everything that I do as far as polygon modeling and block modeling, using that in combination with staying in ZBrush, keeping polygroups, keeping all your stuff isolated in one place as a sculpture and modeling tool, it's so much faster, I find.
It is. And I mean, GoZ is not a big hassle or anything like that, and it works great. But it's always nice to be able to stay in there kind of natively and not have to have that back and forth. Yeah. So it's been good.
Well, and I don't know about you. Do you? Because I tend to end up using a lot. I mean, it's all basic stuff. It's like single or multi-edge loop, Q-mesh, because Q-mesh you can snap and click the edges and get the steppings for, bevels and things. And what would be like my vert one? Like slide verts. I use those. I end
slide
up
constantly.
Yeah, and having the ability to leave it on those and have it retain those settings at each action. Is like I don't have to even go to the menu most of the time. Like, boom, pull that face up, move that thing over here, and
No, and it's much more natural. Instead, I mean, it's more like you're sitting there kind of dancing as opposed to going up to different menus or a hotbox or something like that.
Yeah,
it's been cool. Q-mesh is awesome. I was when I was first playing around with the ZModeler, I was having this issue where I was like, okay, I need to do something here. And I ended up insetting something for a block. It's like, okay, I've seen that you can push it through sometimes, and I tried to push it through, but I didn't have the thing on the other side. It's like, crap, okay, so that's not going to work. And so I threw it back on the other side, and then it actually like auto detected it as I went through. And I was like, and it's not like it was a mirrored action or anything; it was a whole separate action. I was like, okay, well, some of this stuff is well figured out. Like, I am stoked for it.
Yeah, it's like as long as you have mirrored edge loops, or if it's in close enough proximity to the same shape, you're almost always going to get it. Sometimes you get snapping and whatever, but using that in conjunction with like mirror and weld, like do you use custom UIs? Yeah,
I'm generally a person that likes to keep like hotkeys and everything the same. So if I have to hop on someone else's box, either to help solve a problem or just whatever, I don't have to deal with that. That being said, I could not help with how easy it is to just drag stuff off. I definitely have my own stuff that in all those corners, and
I've tried
a little place to fill.
I have all kinds of crazy custom UIs, but being in education and doing a lot of teaching, it's just much better for me to stick to standard, because ultimately, like you said, if you go somewhere else and you don't know you know, you kind of get stuck in your own ways, especially changing hotkeys.
Yeah, you go to sit down at a demo and you look like you've never used the
Yeah.
program before.
I can't even transition from a PC to a Mac. Like the command key to the controller, I'm just like, I like can't do it. You know, that's hard enough. So there's no way I could do anything beyond that.
So I always try to stay away from that, but there were too many fun stuff that I could just drag to corners, and I'm like, okay, you got me.
Yeah. I nerded out once and like made like an Iron Man themed one with like
Really?
Iron Man color. It was like right when Iron Man like 2 came out, I think, and I was
Nerd.
like, yeah, totally,
That's sweet.
for sure. You know,
I change all mine to everywhere that it's stock orange, I change it to blue just so I know I'm at home.
Yeah,
It's a super quick change. It's like, okay, this is my place. I know where I'm at.
I appreciate that because sometimes I do get tired of the dark gray. Everything's
Every
like,
program's gone to it now.
Yeah.
Everybody has gone to that same dark gray as if it's like a cult. It's crazy.
it is weird that it's funny. I don't know what where the trend started. We started a trend, guys. I feel like we owned it
You
from the
did it.
very beginning. It's pretty much been the same for the most part. And a lot of people don't realize you can go in that top corner and change the presets. And there's like 6 or 7 of those.
I know. I love those.
Yeah,
Whenever
there's
my
some
eyes
good
get
ones.
tired, I just go through them and get that like
Yeah.
green one or something.
Yeah. Well, so you know, you're doing a lot of this. You're presented with all these different projects, all kinds of things that you have to do, you know, whether it's characters or set extensions or, you know, streets and all these things. But what's your, as far as, you know, what's your particular style? What do you gravitate towards in your personal artwork? Like, do you do personal artwork a lot?
I do, and you have to almost try to do it because when you do work like longer days, and I've been very lucky. Zero is very good about keeping it reasonable with the overtime more than anywhere else I've ever worked. But you do have to, like, when you're doing it all day, you do have to go home and, you know, do it for yourself because then you remind yourself why you love it and you're doing it for yourself instead of a director.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm just the kind of person who sits down with a Dynamesh sphere, starts clipping stuff out, pulling it every which way, Dynamesh it till I get a fun shape, and then I go off that. Like, I love doing just busts of all sorts, just like a creature bust, an alien bust, anything like that.
Yeah.
And then I do a lot of hard surface stuff just because I'm a person who loves like weird challenges to solve. And with hard surface, it's a lot less, more like traditional sculpting. And it's a lot more of like, how do I get this the right shape, hold that crease, and still have a topo that I can put out and work with in something.
Right.
So I do a lot of that. I mean, creature stuff is super fun.
Yeah, it always is. What's your style of mech? Like, what do you gravitate towards? Anime, Gundam? Paul likes to say Gundam.
Yeah, I don't know. I try to force myself to. You see a lot of stuff that ends up being very similar sometimes on ZBrush Central because
there's so many trends, especially with mech.
But and there's stuff that the tools make you gravitate towards too. When panel loops came out, a lot of stuff's like, okay, so that's the panel loops run.
Like smooth, rounded edges, not as many like harsh creases. Because panel loops ends up to get clean surfaces, you end up having to polish and tighten things up.
Well, and just mech stuff that conforms to the body, or whatever. Which if you ever had to make that in metal, would be a very hard process. Mm-hmm. And I mean, 3D printing now will change that.
Sure.
But so I try to. I don't know. When I do the hard surface, I don't have too many references because I want to keep it somewhat original. One of the things I'll like to do is go back to. I'm trying to remember his name on Instagram. He's a guy who posts really old artwork from like the old like books and like graphic novel covers. Not graphic novels. What are they called? When you pay like a penny for a book, like the old like Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Gosh. I know what you're talking about. I can't think of the name of it either.
Really old stuff, and he posts a bunch of like pre-Star Trek, Star Wars spaceships, and I love that kind of stuff because that stuff happened, and then there is a way that spaceships are now, and we don't like to admit it, and we try to think that we're doing original stuff, but some of the stuff pre that, where it's just these guys that are doing it in oil for really cool stuff, and it's such weird shapes that it's almost like off-putting sometimes.
You're talking about Star Trek,
that.
The first series, the first show?
Well,
I guess
not
movies?
The first show. Probably some of the newer movies.
Like Next Generation and beyond that?
Well, like it was like spaceships had in the 70s and early 80s had a really cool time before some of the stuff got set in stone, like shape-wise. They really played with stuff.
Yeah.
And I love to reference some of that older stuff because you don't see it very much. And it's sometimes you get that thing where it's so ugly, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Like
the Millennium Falcon.
yeah, and one
It's
do you ever like BMW bikes have this really weird design on the old ones where it's like everything else the cylinders go straight on every other bike, and those that go out to the side, and it's so ugly that it's almost like endearing. You're like, okay, that's a fun thing. So I like to try to find stuff like that.
Interesting.
Where it's
so you're kind of set in reality. You think more of the mechanics and the sort of physical construction and
I like to try to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's kind of why I asked because, there are those sort of futurists that, like you said, it's just like crazy amounts of armor and details and all these things. But as far as functionality goes, that has kind of become the topic of discussion, especially with mech and hard surface is like, well, it's not functional, da-da-da. And sometimes I think it's okay if it's not. But, trying to stay grounded in like making sure that you can move the arm, or the torso is kind of important.
It goes both ways because you see stuff and it's like, okay, yeah, like you said, that guy would not be able to turn.
Yeah.
Those three things wouldn't work together. But then there is the other side of it. Like, I don't know if you guys saw, I don't know if he was on the top row or not, but it was this guy who was doing these creatures. Like this was like in the last 2 weeks, and they would have these strange angles like jut off of them, and it looked so otherworldly, and I don't know if those could ever exist. I'm sure you guys saw them, but anyways, it would never work in reality, but it was still the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. Like it was. I wish I knew the guy's name.
Pull it up. Pull up ZVC. See if it's on like the most recent top row.
Was it such cool stuff because a
full mech or was it like sort of like a?
No, they were animals. Go back.
Okay.
Go top row for a second and go back. They were so cool. Yeah, okay. The middle, second down, I think that's them. Yeah. And they were shapes that were like almost mechanical. Yeah.
This was, I loved this.
So like,
yeah, this is
obviously
great.
It's not seated in our reality.
Right.
But it's seated in its own reality that he's made with a style. And it is so cool. I have no idea who he or she is, but I love these. She did a bunch of them. Like, look at that shape.
It's incredibly unique. You're right. It's very different than anything else I've really seen as far as like this sort of soft curves, but then these hard edges at certain points. Like the silhouette, it's like, we always go back to silhouette. Yeah. If you just paint that in silhouette, take all the shading out, look at how much just curvature and all these things that are happening that clearly this artist spent the time to think about those things. Yeah. And I think that's so cool that that there's still, we haven't reached, we're not even close to the capacity of, types of design and things and ways certain creatures, if you believe that, other planets have life, the idea of having life outside of just mankind. Like, and did you see Arrival? Mm-hmm. I thought Arrival was a really unique take on, what another intelligent species could look like, right. And in the whole communication, the language
element. That was a great movie.
It opened my mind up to a lot of things where I thought, it made me think. It's something that Star Trek Next Generation especially tried to do, but as far as like the communication barriers and sometimes, but they always just kind of, it's a show, so they had to make it easy.
They have to gloss over that a little bit because they don't have time.
But there was one episode where they meet a species that I think Picard and the two captains get stranded on this planet and they have to survive, but they can't talk to each other because the other guy speaks through poems, or it's like they're like haikus. He speaks by saying a haiku, and there's like a translation in there, kind of like with Arrival, with each little thing is a manner of describing something. Like we have sentences and paragraphs and structured things that make up something that we have to interpret, but it's interesting to think about that, and
it's that kind of thinking that gets you something really beautiful like this, and that
exactly.
makes you stand out from the crowd, which I think that's what everyone should kind of strive for.
This is a great piece. Have you ever you post on ZVC?
I'm terrible about it. I don't.
It's okay. A lot of is it for lack of time, or is it for lack of feeling like you're?
We need to be better about as a company / companies I've worked at doing like some features, because when I get the time to do something really cool, it's for a movie. Mm-hmm. And so we need to be better about putting up some breakdowns and stuff like that.
We should collaborate, and if you guys have breakdowns and stuff like that.
Ghostbusters had some really fun stuff.
Because you guys
Subway Ghost.
Was the subway, like, how many of those ghosts did you spend? Like, did you get to work on the?
Our primary work was on that Subway Ghost and the Subway set extensions.
Okay.
And he had some really fun problems to solve, so I'm sure we could We could do a fun break.
That was like was it a conductor character? Or like
I think he was supposed to be,
like a train,
there was
the
a
operators?
prison down there.
That's what it was.
And he was electrocuted.
Yeah.
So he was like the electricity guy, but he was in like a prison jumpsuit. And
that was
stuff.
a cool character.
It was so much fun to do. He was interesting because, they originally wanted him to be almost all live action with just adding a little bit of subtleties and stuff in CG, but they ended up wanting to be able to go with a more further in it route because they had him floating, but the harness they had him in was a little bit awkward, and they couldn't quite get the performance they wanted through it. So he ended up turning into a full CG character. But the fun part of that was we had to kind of go through a process of proving that we could get it to look just like the actual guy.
Yeah.
So we ended up shading, sculpting, doing everything in like realistically, and then we did a process of making all the ghostly stuff. But generally in VFX, you get a scan of somebody to have a good kind of start to go off of, and they didn't have one on set that day to get him.
Oh, so you had to start from scratch?
We had to do like a perfect likeness to get them approved likeness.
I love it.
CG.
Did you get to do that?
I did a bunch of it.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
It was one of those things where I generally think like I see a bunch of these amazing likenesses on ZBrush Central, and I've always kind of been in the mindset of, I don't remember if it was Disney or one of his guys, maybe it was Milk Call. They said, I think it was Milk Call. Why would we do animations about people? This was when they did a lot of animal stuff, when you could just shoot that in film. And so I've always thought, if I'm going to make something, I don't want it to exist in real life already.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to put hours of my life into this. I don't want it to, I don't need to match reality for that.
Because ultimately, it's going to end up being temporary artwork that it gets lost in translation. It's like, so it's that guy.
And people have seen it. But so this one, we did have to do that very closely matching reality part of it without a scan. And so it was a lot of, we had good reference, luckily, of him and his prosthetics. So it was a lot of ZBrushing back and forth for that. Also, feature I love that I don't think enough people use, I can't even remember the name of it. The see-through at the top that you can pull back and forth to your desktop.
Yeah.
I never see people use it. It's super fun. I love it.
It's an awesome, quick on the go. Like keep your Google, page up with images, and you can throw that in the background.
Especially if you're single monitor.
Yeah. Well, as far as single monitor goes, I'm a Spotlight guy all the way. Because Spotlight, you can bring in 20 or 30 images and use the tiling and cycling. And a lot of people don't realize, like, Spotlight's technically a texturing tool, but if you turn Spotlight projection off,
you just throw it up.
I line them up in like corners of the image or of the ZBrush canvas, and then if you save it and you load it back in, everything's in the same place.
Yeah, it's still in the project.
Yeah, so I'll save iterations and I'll strip down the trays and like give them maximum space. But I still have two monitors, but that's how I use, because I don't know what
Spotlight
you
too, but I don't like a cluttered thing up there. So sometimes I have trouble with a bunch of images. So that's why I like the see-through option.
I think that's most people. Like I always show my students Spotlight, and they always want to go back to image plane or use see-through.
The image plane thing is if you're just coming from an older the way of doing it,
I agree.
which I get it. I love it.
Yeah. What I don't like, or I don't condone, I try my best to stray away from showing people this, even in general, even though it's a great feature, is applying images to the floor grid. X, Y, and Z planes, applying an image.
I didn't even know you could do it.
Yeah, you can go into the draw palette and you can assign the top of the floor plane. So if you're in the Y plane, for example, you can put one on the top and on the bottom, and you can bring it to a perfect square. I've done it for like
up.
Yeah. So if you're gonna do like vehicles, like everybody's done like a standard like car in Maya with like curves, like building on a curve or whatever. But it's the way to do it in ZBrush. But I don't like showing people that because like one of my first projects in my digital sculpting class is sculpting a skull.
Okay.
And I give them orthos. And a lot of it is about testing your creative eye to just see it and make it.
That's why figure drawing is so important. Is
Exactly.
learning to take, this is this much, this is this much, and translating that without ortho. Because reality is you don't usually get orthos in real life.
No, exactly. And that's what I like. You're ultimately, I feel like you're shooting yourself in the foot trying to like, everybody wants to like, okay, I got my front, I got my side and my top, and they're trying to match it to those things, and it never looks right.
Well, half the time it never matches if it was shot with a wider lens.
Exactly.
So you've got to learn to kind of fly by it.
I think you're better off just learning to see it for what it is, and like have a couple images up there, and if you're doing a likeness, it's like even trying to match one likeness to another, like what do we all do? We all Google like celebrities or
Yeah.
people, and you're getting like red carpets with different focal lengths and
Yeah.
different angles of perspective. Like it'll never match up.
Yep.
So why even try? You know, but yeah, that's a good call out. The see-through feature, that was new in R
Must have been like
7.
5.
No, it was 6,
7?
maybe 6. 6, I can't remember now. They just blur together. It's like
That's the funny thing is the R's instead of the other version numbers.
well, yeah, we like to dump out, like you were mentioning earlier, we put out so many new features
Which
with
is
each
great.
one. Like each release update is really like a point update. You know, it's like a full release basically, but we're doing points. Like our 1 through 7 have been like, basically we're on ZBrush 12 right now.
Yeah. I was surprised when you guys, shout out to you guys for doing it because so many packages won't when you did the 64-bit kind of re-release, because that takes a lot of rewriting to make the 64-bit version, and so many companies won't do it because they got too much legacy, stuff in there.
Yeah.
That was a really nice, that opened up a lot when you're not limited to that.
Well, it's like, and that one's still that's a free open beta we provide for our 7, so you get 32 and 64, as you know. But when that full version comes out, it's going to be even better. I mean, it's been the same one since R7, the first release. So we're on R3 now, and R8's coming out soon. So it'll be even more polished. But I mean, gosh, you can go up to 100 million polys without HD. As long as what is your like your ZBrush computer? What's your processing power? What are you guys running?
Oh, what is the processor? It's like a 40 core thing. It's got a Titan in it as the graphics card, and then very nicely has 128 gig of RAM.
That's
so
where
that
it's at.
I can actually have ZBrush.
ZBrush is
doing
pretty
other
much
stuff too.
no video card, so RAM and good processors
RAM.
like killer.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's good.
I've been lucky. Zero has some really nice boxes to work on.
So, you got all these personal projects that you're working on, and as far as your professional career, you seem like you're happy working in visual effects for now. Do you have as far as what could you see yourself doing from here? Because I mean, the visual effects world, it's like CG in general is changing so rapidly all the time with introduction of, 3D printing and people starting to use those tools just for practical usage and, actually making physical things, not to mention all the stuff coming out with VR and AR.
Yeah.
What do you have any like lofty goals that you're, maybe trying to reach in the next 5-6 years or?
Yeah. I really like the visual effects side of it. I always keep up on the gaming world, but it's never totally been my thing. I like that at the end of our day, it's kind of a flat rasterized thing that we can noodle, whereas in a game, it's got to be much more alive and stuff has to, keep moving. I like the flattened out so we can present like the best image of it so you get that theater experience. And VR is going to change that a lot on our end as well. So we'll see where that goes. But I like visual effects. I would love to, in like 10 years, move into feature animation, I think, once I've kind of am done with some of those longer days that visual effects put you in. You still have very long days in animation, but
sure.
But we'll see. Right now I'm you kind of like the working artist level, and then above that is a CG soup and a VFX soup. I would love to do some CG souping and VFX souping where you're more on set for stuff like that. But then sometimes with that, you get a little bit caught up in having to email all day and do some of that. So I'm going to enjoy my time as an artist on the box for right now.
Right. I think it's important to like get your badges, and like do your time. And I think eventually like I see people that have been doing it for a really long time. That, some of our friends, go from big studios, and ultimately as they start, raising a family and they start settling down more, like when you're not that young gun, like with nothing but time under your belt, like, those days it's easy, but eventually it's like you kind of have to find a way to still do what you love, but also not do it 16 hours a day, 6 days a week.
It's definitely changed. I mean, that VFX was when it started, was much more like a Wild West, and now all those guys are married and have kids, so it's calming down a little bit with a little less overtime because now those guys want to see their families, which helps keep hours down and stuff like that.
It's because they're like, everybody go home.
Yeah, it's like I want to go see my kids.
I gotta go see my kids recital. My son's playing baseball. yeah, that's great.
So it's always changing, and I think it's important to be fluid with it. Like right now I'm very lucky. There's a lot of work in LA, but there was a bit of a dry spell. There will probably be another dry spell.
Sure.
I'd love to move to Canada. I'd love to move to like Australia. Just kind of staying open to what options are there.
What are the major spots? Like I would say Vancouver, London, New Zealand. I guess you have Weta.
It's mostly
LA.
You have Los Angeles, then you have Vancouver and Montreal are the Canada hubs, and you do have London as well.
Like frame stores there and
NPC. Most people have a London house.
Yeah.
And then you have Australia, which has, Luma's down there, and Animal Logic, which I'd love to do some of their stuff. Did you guys see the new Lego movie yet?
Oh, of course.
Oh, it's
I
so good.
loved it. Lego
Best
Batman?
DC movie of the year.
I was such a fan of the first one, and I loved the Batman's character was great, but it was actually really well written
As a film,
As
yeah.
a film, it was just a great movie overall.
Totally.
Forget the comedy is amazing, of course, and it's so cool what they do with a combination of we live in this great time where, sure, there's feuds with practical and digital, but there's a good artist, a good art director knows when some practical effects are great. Like they do some stop motion, and then guys like you will go in and, do set extensions and blah, blah, blah. But it's so cool that's like a real Lego guy that somebody stopped, Leica. Since Leica came out, it's thank God that a studio is willing to dedicate to that much hard work.
Kubo was amazing.
Yeah, Kubo was really good. All their movies are amazing, but I think I have such a great appreciation for all forms of art, and I don't think that we should out with the practical and everything's digital kind of thing.
It's super funny. I think people would be surprised. The biggest fans of practical are CG, our computer graphics guys. We always want to see it that way if that's the right spot for it, and if we have to throw a bit of enhancement on, but it looks great that way.
Right.
It's funny.
Whatever works. I mean, I don't know. Do you see yourself ever wanting to get into something like Weta Practical?
Their workshop?
Their workshop, Weta Workshop. Their stuff, they have all these crazy statues and toys and collectibles. Is that something you'd be interested in?
Yeah. Did you guys see the Kickstarter they just did?
No.
It'll probably be out by the time this comes out. But they did in their workshop. They did a bunch of these amazing mechs, and I'm sure they were done in ZBrush. And they're all 3D printed miniatures, and they're doing this board game randomly, and it's made a whole bunch of money, but it's super cool stuff branching out like that. That is super fun. I would love to be at Weta Workshop for a while and do some of the practical. And 3D printing is just, that game is going to change everything.
I know we haven't even touched the scratched surface on potential of where we can use it. It's used in production in certain, we got to Stupid Buddy Studios, the people that do Robot Chicken.
Yeah.
They do a ton of ZBrush because they have to recreate a lot of old toys that
don't exist.
Yeah.
It would cost $1 million.
I wish I could explain to you this warehouse. The warehouse they had of just, it was twice the size of the height of this room, and just as far as you could see, of just shelves of toys that they've collected from garage sales and
That's
old.
so rad.
Yeah, and
they
it's
do great work.
Yeah, they do, but they have a awesome, a really great pipeline with ZBrush and printing, and I think they use a Stratus printer, or I forget which one it was, but that's quick and easy.
Leica's great about it too. I mean, all their faces now,
Yep.
or not all, but many of their faces now are the 3D prints.
Yeah.
And they've got that pipeline figured out too. So,
yeah. I mean, for me, I don't know about you. Because I mean, there's, like you said, we all kind of idolize the old school. It's you always idolize the forefathers of the thing. It's we all want to be that. It's kind of what got us into this thing in the first place. And being able to print your thing and hold it and see it. It's great to have a final render and even have something animated, but there's something special about just being able to have it in your hand.
Oh, totally. When I was saying the very first thing I used ZBrush on was that a ZLAT Protoss thing. And way, way before there was this wonderful STL exporter out of ZBrush was when I did that. And I took it through 4 packages to 3D print it. Because at that school, they also had an engineering department, and they had a new 3D printer they were trying, and they were looking for stuff.
Was it a powder base or PLA or?
It was PLA, and it was the nicer dissolve method, so you didn't have to deal with those awful supports.
Oh yeah.
But it was so cool to see. It was because it was before it was really done, and it was holding that thing that you just sculpted.
Yeah.
And It's a nightmare getting it out to a 3D print format, though.
It's gotten easier, but it's still
way easier now.
Yeah, it's so much easier. It's just a matter of now. I feel like the hard work goes into reducing the amount of grow lines and supports. Like a good support workflow is essential because you don't want to dirty up all your edges. And
yeah, now it's just about getting it to print right.
Yes, exactly.
The exporting is not as quite as rough.
Yeah, but like, so I mean, so the idea, like, I was going to ask you this: what do you see as with visual effects? Because right now, visual effects is a tool that is more widely used. Like we were talking about Netflix and all these great outlets where all kinds of things have even like really crappy like TV shows, like the show The 100 on CW.
Yep.
So like so much visual effects, like a lot of flyovers, a lot of compositing, a lot of just amazing stuff. And they clearly don't have they do have a pretty good budget, but across the board, there's all kinds of shows now that have great visual effects. Everyone,
and and green screens everywhere. Everything kind of has to be touched in post now.
Yeah,
which is just the industry is kind of the movie and TV show and all that industry has kind of changed. But yeah, just about everything gets touched. And it's hard because sometimes a lot of the TV guys, I don't think, get enough credit because they just don't have time. Like
because they have schedules and deadlines.
Yeah, the schedules for TV work is utter craziness. Right. It's super hard.
Well, it's like, did you watch the South Park documentary? It's like something in a day or something like that.
Yeah.
Each episode that they do within a season is like they're cranking the thing out in a day.
It's nuts.
And now they transition to 3D, so it's easier now.
Yeah.
But still, it's like, gosh, I can't imagine the amount of stress. I mean, maybe they've just gotten so used to it.
I'm sure you've got to. I'm sure you got to get used to jitters or something from that much stress.
You have to learn how to let go of the little things, right? Like I can't mess with this little tweak anymore. I got to just cut it off.
Because no one else is going to notice it but you.
That's right.
That's one of the hardest things.
I know, right? I was going to ask you, because I see the visual effects world, all of us artists, and we're all artists, even technical, even renderers and people. It's like it's an art form still. It's like you're you have to perceive the world in a way where you have to sort of organically try and recreate things and see things for what they are and not look past the cup. Like look at how the shading hits it. Like we learn and see things that the average person doesn't, and our trade is very broad in terms of the stuff that we learn. So for me, I see visual effects, animation, ZBrush, modeling, 3D printing, like I see it moving beyond entertainment in the very near future.
Oh, definitely.
But like, what are your feelings on like the future of the visual effects world and entertainment as a whole?
Yeah. It drives me nuts when a lot of people think they say visual effects is figured out. We've solved all the problems. We've got a beautiful glossy reflection on that cup. It's done. Which to me is always so far from the truth. Like if you take a flashlight to something and really look at it, you take a magnifying glass and you see all the things that are happening there, we have not figured this stuff out. There's a lot of stuff that still needs development, and Disney's really good about some of their dev stuff. Like we just barely got Snow kind of working. So I think there's a lot of challenges that we still need to figure out and kind of get there with, and then just taking it to finding those challenges is a big part of the fun part about, I think, where visual effects, the future will be.
Yeah.
VR is going to be a lot of that. It's going to be a big game changer in just that workflow, because a lot of the stuff we do rely a bit on the fact that it's a rasterized 2D image,
right.
And you're trying to direct the eye to this one spot.
Right. I think we've been able to figure, as far as rendering, like getting realism, we can get still. We can get like subsurface scattering, all the backscattering, lighting, all those things. Like as far as like human characters, I've mentioned this before, but I think the best thing I've seen in recent memory was in small doses, the recreation of Schwarzenegger in Terminator, the most recent one. Like, not the best movie in the world, but like some of it was dark, and it was the scene where like he comes back, he's transported back in time, and then he stands up and he looks, and it was like everything was working. For me, I see the errors in movement, with
facial stuff.
It's like facial movement, everything. We haven't quite figured out how to film. Is obviously way better than video games, but still, it's like there has never been a moment where I've been like, even you could look at Rogue One. Like Rogue One had some awesome moments, But like General was
Grand Moff Tarkin.
Grand Moff Tarkin has been such a wide debate on this.
I think we all have to be careful and not get cocky because sometimes we think.
Do you
we
feel
have
like they got a
figured
little
out.
cocky with that one? I kind of did. It was like they were like, "Oh yeah, we got this. We can show him for 20 minutes on screen."
That was the problem. Like they have their facial pipeline very well. I mean,
Which
them
don't
and
get me
Weta,
wrong,
it's
is still
amazing.
amazing. Yeah,
It is.
absolutely.
And like some of the stuff for Warcraft was so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I don't look at an orc every day for 20 hours a day.
Exactly.
So when it doesn't move quite right, I'm not going to notice it. But when a human does something just a little bit off, I notice it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they could have been a little better about darkening some stuff on that and putting him in and using him in ways that weren't just so forefront in your face, because that was declaring that we have this figured out. And I think
it kind of was. You know, it's like even like I thought Leia looked amazing. There was like some lighting, maybe just like too many hot spots or something. Her skin was just too shiny.
when you saw her for a second, so it's going to hold up for a second.
Exactly.
But
Right.
even like my girlfriend doesn't work in CG.
Mm-hmm.
That first shot of Tarkin before you even see him you saw the back of his head in the reflection. She's like, "Is that guy CG?" And I was like, "Okay."
She caught it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think we should all have to be careful because there's a lot of stuff still to figure out.
Right.
And that shouldn't stop us from pushing it wherever we
Definitely
can.
not.
But there's no shame in sometimes letting something be a little dark.
I mean, it's like you have to kind of slowly introduce these new ways of doing things to the general public that are watching, like especially movies. I feel like the introduction of 60 frames per second, for example, is still I don't particularly like it because it's just I prefer like standard 24 frames per second. I enjoy that experience. Like I don't like it's too CG and digital when it's moving so fast. I'm like even though I see that way now, it just doesn't feel right.
I'm the exact same way. We're used to it because it's been 24 forever. And then it feels like a soap opera almost because, TV sometimes was running on 30 frames per second.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, but I mean, here's the thing. That's like, sometimes we have to push through that hard period of getting people used to it. But you have to find the right times for things. Because like, I think anyone who does great practical effects will agree that practical will work great for, so many things, but then there's certain stuff where it won't hold up because it's either has to fly across the camera, you have to do with wires or something. So it's finding those happy points where, and admitting like, okay, VFX, we can't do that very well for this point. So we can't do that full facial, seeing that guy there. And it's just like the practical guys know, okay, we can't do that practically. It just won't hold up. And admitting that sometimes there are limits, but still trying to push them.
Yeah. I mean, look, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier is like setting higher expectations and working towards new things. And I think I appreciate that, those studios and the people that are trying those things out that they're actually attempting them. I would rather them do that than not.
For sure.
It's like just having the debate, I think is good.
And there's always that growing phase. Like it has to happen.
Yeah. I mean, just because not everybody agrees with it doesn't mean that it's bad, and doesn't mean that
there's always haters.
Yeah. There's always going to be haters. And overall, like I thought Rogue One, what movie in the Oscars this year, what won Best Visual Effects?
It was Jungle Book and it was well deserved.
Well deserved. Dude, okay, going to Jungle Book, I think this is one of the first times I've seen a fully digital, like animated scene where I couldn't tell. It was the credits, the end credits.
Okay.
Where they're doing, it's like
that crazy stuff with the book, right?
It blew my mind because I think it was at the right angle and the right distance where you couldn't see any little render flaws and the movement was so flawless. And it was like, I just got the chills just thinking about it. I remember watching it in theaters, like that was freaking amazing. But those standout moments are special because they don't always happen.
Yeah, I mean, they're hats off to their animators and some of their fur and muscle people.
Yeah.
But again, kind of back to the not getting cocky thing. I was watching a breakdown and they said they had this rule on that movie where if the tiger walks into frame and sits down and delivers a line, they would make the animators find a piece of like archival footage of a cat walking in and sitting down, and they animated to that. And that's why it was so real. And then they'd add the voice, performance on later.
Right.
But because they took an actual animal doing its weird little head cocks and all that stuff, as it would actually do, instead of just saying, we're great animators, we know what we're doing, we're going to reinvent this book. No, they were very super smart how they did it. And it looked great. That movie blew my socks off.
Well, it's like you go back to Jurassic Park, like you watch the amount of time and effort they spent in pre-production just with actors. Like, it's like, oh gosh, why can't I think of his name right now? It's terrible of me. I'm embarrassed. The guy who plays Gollum.
Andy Serkis.
Andy Serkis, like, actors like Andy Serkis, where, they're in full raptor costumes or full, they're actually going through and doing the movements and spending a lot of time developing the idea behind it. And it still holds up because they used, like you said, they weren't too cocky. They used the right amount of visual effects in the right places. And still that T-Rex scene was like, it's with the perfect combination of rain and it was dark enough. Like, it looks just as good as most stuff you've seen today.
Yeah, it holds up well. And like you're saying, the Planet of the Apes stuff where they actually were in like ape suits and had like special things to launch their arms, it looked great.
Planet of the Apes is another unreal one. I think that
I can't wait for the next one.
I know. I just saw the trailer last night. The most recent trailer looks.
I don't know if
so
I've
good.
seen it.
It's really good.
I'll have to watch it.
It's I don't know. There's a lot of recurring elements from the last movie, but it seemed. I mean, who doesn't love Woody Harrelson? So
Yeah,
it would be good.
And I love the original, and I actually really, really loved the. Everyone disagrees. I like the Tim Burton one. I thought that had some really cool practical.
I did too.
Face masks and stuff.
Yeah.
So I love that franchise. I'm stoked for it.
Yeah, for sure. Did Tim? That would have been. Didn't Rick Baker work on Planet of the Apes?
I think he did
That
work on
one?
the Tim Burton one. Yeah, the not Matt Damon. What's his name? Mark Wahlberg.
Mark
one.
Wahlberg. Yeah,
I like that one a lot.
It's still. I agree. Like, a lot of people hated on it because they changed the timeline a little bit.
Yeah.
But I thought it was a cool take on it. Like to me, mostly everything that Tim Burton does is at least like creative outside of like Alice in Wonderland. I didn't really care for it, but what was the most recent one I saw? The most recent film, Miss Peregrine's.
Oh yeah,
that was a great movie.
that one was interesting. That one had a lot of
quirky.
visual effects in it. That one was an interesting one to work on.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say earlier, as far as the future of VFX, like my take on it is, I mean, I really see all of us, like, we have all this giant skill set. Like, I always think of, for some reason, I always think of Blade Runner in my head. I think of the
classic.
Yeah, I think of the guy, the eye guy, that he he just recreates eyes, and that's his one thing. It's like, at some point, like, as technology develops and augmented reality, virtual reality, at some point the science behind it, as far as education, being like a surgeon, for example, you still have to have that training. But I think eventually we'll have a system where artists will be using those kinds of tools in regular life outside of just entertainment. Like, it's already happening now, with doctors using, small amounts of 3D applications or, using virtual reality with cameras and all kinds of things. So I really see all the sort of pioneering that people in animation and visual effects have been sort of developing over the last 20, 30 years, turning into something so much more than entertainment.
There's definitely a lot of merging been happening. And originally VFX, I mean, it was a bunch of like industrial design people and people coming from other fields because animation degrees didn't exist, and bringing the elements of all theirs into it to build that. So hopefully, that now that technology can actually give back a little bit. And I mean, you see it happening. You see it with 3D printing. I was traveling the other day and I met up with a college buddy. And he's like, oh, that's, because he knows what I do. And he's like, have you ever heard of like a program called Keyshot? I was like, oh yeah, it's great. I use it with ZBrush all the time. Like, you use ZBrush? That's like, I can't wait to use that. It looks so cool and it looks so powerful. And I mean, he's doing it to work on buildings and product design stuff.
Oh,
and
interesting.
it's all going to start, flowing outwards to.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying towards the beginning of like kids almost learning it in school as a second to drawing,
Right.
So that because it'll go out into everything else.
It's slowly becoming more of an essential sort of part of our lives. I think eventually it will trickle down into like, everybody knows Photoshop, but not everybody knows Keyshot and ZBrush and all these other things, or 3ds Max and Maya. Like, those aren't like regular, people terms. Yeah. But I think eventually it will be, and eventually there will be reasons for us to use it. As soon as we figure out a way to
3D print a sandwich.
Exactly.
That's what I'm ready for.
Like, printing will be the reason why people learn it, because
I think so.
Yeah, but like, we need to figure out how to get past the technical hurdles of like how to make this thing stay this way without having to deal with supports and cleanup and, maybe having to make a mold of it and do a different material. It's like, really, materials are going to be the biggest problem, right?
Yeah, and just affordability of getting it into homes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But we will. I think very soon it'll just be a standard thing to have that 3D printer in your room.
Yeah.
Go online, pay $10 for the schematics for your Nikes, and then just print it.
That's right. I hope so. I hope that's a world that we'll live in, but you know, we'll see. There's a lot of it's just like a lot of negative comments on 3D printing as a whole, saying that it's dying, but it never really got started. You know, it's like
Who
it
says
never
it's dying. That's crazy.
I've read all kinds of crazy articles, like it just, you know, like the haters. The haters,
nuts.
they get jaded and they're like, you know, everybody bought stock in, you know, all these printing companies, and some of them have gone down, but
That's
I think
part
it was,
of the growth.
Yeah, it was
and
too
everyone's so
early.
afraid of automation right now. I think it's more fear than hate, which is sad.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, do you have any, as far as artists and people that want to get into visual effects, that want to do ZBrush, what would be your general advice for somebody that wants to do what you do? You know, like as far as what skills you need to have, what kind of frame of mind goes into being successful at that?
Yeah, totally. I guess the one to get out of the way first is that it is a lot of it's like everything else. Building your network and connections are really huge, and it's helpful. But don't let that discourage you, because there's always ways to break in, and fight to break in, and don't be afraid of like I said, I love working at smaller studios. Don't be afraid of not working at ILM or whatever for your first gig, because a lot of the truth of that is, if that's your first gig, you're going to be watching the render farm for 2 years, and then you get to start doing stuff.
Right.
So don't be afraid of starting small, and don't get attached to that one company that does the beautiful work that you love, because you can take that beautiful work stylistically and make it at your own place. So I saw so many friends get set on working at that one golden place and then just being stuck stagnant. Like, follow so much of this. Whenever you hear somebody's story, you hear those 4 lucky points, you know, where that one thing, they took that opportunity and it jetted them off. Like, follow, if you have an opportunity, don't be afraid of it. Get out of the comfort zone and follow it, because that might be that thing that gets you to that golden place. Much quicker than sitting there watching job postings for it.
Well,
constantly.
and it's like, it's all ultimately is in the pursuit. I mean, if you can get into it for the right reasons, it's in the pursuit of art. So like, really I would say the best possible opportunity is to be creative, and the best place for you to be creative and continue to learn too, you know, like a place that gives you the ability to do more. And like, it seems like you have a really great place with Zero, where you kind of get to do a lot of different things, and it's a challenge. It seems like you're not just doing like head sculpts for a video game, and that's all you do is head sculpts.
I'm a sucker for variety.
Yeah.
I love that.
I like that. I appreciate that you have this sort of like problem solving aspect in your life, where you're continually presented with a new thing, and now you have to figure out how to make it work. And that's part of the fun, right? Like,
yeah.
For me, I love the challenge of it. So I think that's really good advice, man. And it's awesome to see what you guys are doing at Zero. And I'm glad we actually got a chance to connect.
Yeah, totally.
It's
great to be on. Thank you very much.
We got you a gift, man.
My goodness.
So for carrying the ZBrush torch, we got you a
This is super
hoodie.
exciting, because I went to NAB as a school kid. I don't know, like 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And you guys had a booth up, and I didn't have any money, and there were ZBrush shirts up there, and I couldn't afford it.
If
so
you
now I
would've
finally
just
got
told
my ZBrush
us,
shirt.
if you would have told somebody, they probably would have just given you one, man.
Probably. I was a nervous college kid.
Oh, dude. Well, it was awesome chat with you, man. I appreciate it, and hopefully all those people out there listening, and look at what you're doing, and it seems like you're at a great point in your career where you have a lot of options.
Thank you.
Well, dude, we got to connect and see if we can get you guys up on ZBC. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, buddy. All right. ZBrush podcast number 7 signing out. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.